Joining today's podcast is Tom Hackimer, pro baseball pitcher. Welcome, Tom. I'm thrilled to have you on the show.
Thank you very much, Wayne. I'm very glad to be here.
Oh, thanks. You've had great success in college baseball at St. John's. So you were Big East Pitcher of the Year for 2016?
Yes.
And then you were drafted by the Mets in the 15th round.
Yeah, the year before that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then in the Twins in the 4th round in 2016.
Yep.
Then you made it to AAA with a minor league record of 18-11 with a 3.13 ERA, 28 saves in 150 games, and striking out 247 batters in 210 innings before you're injured. That's a good record.
Thank you. It's I felt like I pitched pretty decently throughout all the stops I had.
Yeah. And now I see you're doing well with the Long Island Ducks after your recovery from Tommy John, and look forward to seeing you do well.
Yeah, it's been good to be able to play sort of closer to home. I'm from Long Island, so a lot of people that I know have been coming out to the games. Everyone thinks it's very cool because everyone, the Ducks have been a pretty big thing here for 20 or so years.
Oh, yeah, they're great.
Yeah.
I was tempted to open the show by, instead of saying I'm thrilled to have you on the show, by telling you, hey, how you doing?
Yeah.
I was born in Brooklyn too. So
yeah, I live in Brooklyn currently. So plenty of that still going around.
Yeah. We've had pitching coaches and scouts, a former GM on the show. And the reason I wanted you on, because I wanted to hear a perspective from a pitcher on the subject of command and control and the mental side of pitching. Too often people confuse control and command. And on this show, we're trying to help people understand the difference. So how would you describe control and how would you describe command?
So the difference that I've always seen between those two is control is basically your ability to keep the ball in the strike zone in general, and command is more of the fine ability to throw it where you want it in the strike zone. I think that's generally what most people you ask probably say.
Yeah, except I always tell them it's the ability to throw where you want in or out of the zone, because as a pitcher sometimes you want to be in the shadow zone,
right? Of course. Yeah.
And some people don't get that nuance, and it's, as a pitcher, if you want to brush a guy off the plate and reclaim part of the plate, that's important.
Right, and that's a very fine skill to have.
Yeah, and that's a good way of putting it. I always define it as a skill too, that you have to train that. You can't just, doesn't come naturally. You have to train that, right?
Yeah, well, it's one of those things that I think that there are guys that I've played with that I could wake them up in the middle of the night and stand down a hallway with a glove, and they're going to hit me on their first throw. Mm-hmm. And I know very well that I'm not one of those guys. So for me, it's very much more something I have to view as a skill that I have to train and maintain. But I think there's certainly guys that I've played with and that I've come across who for them, it's much more innate. Just like some guys naturally throw harder, some guys can naturally throw it where they want. But I think for a lot of us, it's a skill that you have to be very cognizant of and very aware that you have to train.
Yeah. Well, like even with Chapman, you can have a skill of throwing hard. And if you're not training right, you can regress down to throwing 95 instead of 105,
Right, exactly.
With everyone throwing hard nowadays, it seems to me that command is now the separator. It used to be velocity. What do you think about that?
I think it probably always still has been. It used to be like the guys who, because throwing hard was so rare, those guys who threw upper 90s, 100 were more likely to make it, just based on the velocity.
That's a great point. I was talking with I won't tell the name of the team. It was a scout this afternoon, and we were kind of texting and chatting about this. And I was saying that, it's not the separator anymore, it's command. And he was saying, yeah, it kind of always was, but it's been kind of overshadowed with, I think people can read a radar gun, so they just think that's the better thing,
Well, yeah, there's a phrase that I've thrown around a few times myself, and I've heard a bunch, is that the scouts aren't back there with a command gun. They don't have one of those. So it's one of those things where you can measure velocity, and I think that made it easier to point at sometimes, be like, okay, this guy's good. Command is it's much harder to quantify command.
Yeah. You could do control very easily, but command, that's kind of why I made that target, the command tracker target.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, so you can train command. You actually have the intent and the location.
Yeah, and
Because I don't think you.
it's a much
Yeah,
easier, it's a much more direct way of tracking it, it looks like.
yeah, because the other ways were subjective,
Right.
especially people looking at video. And when I saw the way you were throwing, I liked the movement that you have, and wasn't high velocity. It was movement and location. I thought that's a good skill. So that's why I thought you would be good for this show as well, because uh, I wanted to know, how did you train for that, for command and control?
I appreciate that you think that, but what sets me apart, I think, as a pitcher is that I throw from a very low release point. Obviously, I'm a side armor. I throw from lower than it seems I do, and I throw pretty hard for where my release point is. It's very rare to have that combination of pitch characteristics, the very low release height and the velo I can create. I would say that I am, for my career, have not been a tremendously command first pitcher by any means. It's something that I've struggled with a lot over the years. So I, well, it's that seems a little counterintuitive why you'd have me on the command tracker show. I think that there's a lot of value. I think that I've learned a lot less about how to throw strikes from the teammates I've been talking about, like the teammates who could wake up and throw strikes. I've learned a
Mhm.
lot more from the guys who couldn't throw strikes and then got to a point where they could sort of throw strikes. Like it's a skill you have to learn, and it's much harder to learn a skill from somebody who has never had to learn it and has always just had it. You have
Yeah.
to, if you want to learn a skill, you have to go to somebody who has learned that skill or knows how to teach that skill. And sometimes people who just have it innately don't understand why they can do it. So I've looked into a lot of different ways to try to train command. I've thrown drive lines, sort of different size differential balls. Those were an interesting one. They're a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller, a little bit heavier, a little bit lighter. Those are interesting. Those are still part of my routine to this day, although maybe a little less than they have been in the past. Uh, and overall, I think the biggest thing that I've ever really learned for command is that it's not it's not something that I'm ever going to fix. Like I'm never going to just be able to not work on it. It's going to be something that'll be a constant for as long as I'm still playing. That's going to be my
Yeah.
focus, basically.
Yeah. It's
And that the real challenge comes like making sure I maintain the focus that I need to have pitch to pitch when I'm out on the mound, because that's going to be the biggest separator for me, or it has been so far in my career.
Yeah, like Gil Patterson talks about, if you let things get to you, like a fielder missing something or a bad call by an ump, then the wheels come off, and you got to put those wheels on before the next pitch comes.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. It has to be.
I did see you in your series. You were trying to work on command at, I think it was Adam Ottavino's place in the city.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and what I saw from that though was that, although you were trying to work on command, and I've seen a lot of videos like this, it seemed to me you're really working on control. And sometimes people, they see that kind of thing and they confuse even more command and control.
Right. I
So
think that overall, especially when I was trying to uh like during my like rehab bullpens, during my recovery still, I was very much trying to do a little too much a lot of the time because I felt good at that point, and I was trying to like bite off more than I could chew, basically. It's I was trying to like work on my very fine command when I really should have just been trying to get the ball into the zone, basically, and make
yeah,
sure that I felt okay. Uh, and I was trying to like work on pitches, maybe a little more than I really needed to, past the point of like throwing them and it feeling okay. And I think that that actually set me back a little bit. I could have segmented those things a little bit better, like getting you know, the getting my arm feeling good and the velocity back to where, you know, I needed it to be or where I expected it to be. And then after I was comfortable with that, working more on like, okay, now we need to focus on throwing it where we want, now that we're not concerned that, you know, this pitch isn't going to feel good.
mhm.
Like once I was confident that my arm was healthy again and back to what I was prior to surgery.
Well, yeah, I think we had talked about that earlier before the show about in people's recovery from Tommy John. You can feel good and then all of a sudden try to do more than you should and set yourself back. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I know it's like a really defined process for recovery now. That's
It's very routine, right? The surgery happens a lot. Tons of people go through the recovery. It has a pretty good success rate. It's not a guarantee by any means, but it's the general idea is that if you follow your program, you're probably going to be okay at the end of it. It's a very, very well-defined process, and it's a very, it's unfortunately it's a very common thing now. But what the good part of that is that you can have a lot of confidence in the idea that if you follow your program and you don't try to do anything too crazy, you're probably going to come out the other end pretty good.
Yeah. I was also wondering, I was talking with another scout yesterday about this, talking about ways of detecting injury earlier. For example, when a pitcher starts losing control, it's obvious there's something wrong. One of the first things might be you start losing a little command, or you start using the ability to know where your misses will be. Did you notice anything before your injury that kind of was an early warning to an injury might be coming?
No, the only thing was that my forearm just was very tight and started to hurt a bit, which is a little out of character. Like, it's normally, my forearm is generally a little tight. It's just sort of the nature of pitching and especially throwing the way that I do. But my last few outings leading up to when I finally had to shut down before I was officially diagnosed, I had some of the best command of my career, and I had my velocity and pitches were all good quality. They were all exactly what I would expect. And it was just that I could no longer throw because I was in pain, which was a very unfortunate, it's a very disheartening combination of factors that I felt like I was performing really well. And I also could feel the tightness in my forearm getting worse and sort of knowing what was on the way. It's possible that it's because I knew it was getting worse. I knew I had to focus more on each pitch, and therefore they were better quality. So in a sort of ironic way, it was actually an incredibly good sort of guardrail for me to force me to get through the outing as efficiently as possible. For most guys that I've played with who were good command guys, that was one of the signs. Because I think in other injuries I've had, I had a shoulder problem in 2018 or so. Every time I went to go throw the ball, like as I went to lay back, the front of my shoulder just hurt a ton. And I knew when I tried to go throw it would hurt even worse. And when you get to that point and it's starting to hurt like that, you can't really focus on the finer parts of where you're going to throw it. It's just like, I want to get through this without it being really painful. And I know it's going to hurt.
Yeah, so that kind of leads back to what we were talking about earlier about command. I've always thought it has a lot to do with your mental focus. And you're saying, like, if you have pain or discomfort somewhere, it's going to have shifted your focus from what you need to be doing.
Yeah, it moves obviously way. It's really hard to focus on two different things of that magnitude, right? You can get distracted pretty easily by having significant pain. And I think that's for a lot of guys. I think having a very clear idea of where you want to throw the ball, where you have to start it, what you have to think about in order to get it there. You have to have a pretty clear idea of that, and things that are distracting you from that are obviously going to make that much more difficult.
What are some of the ways that you've found that were really good for training control, and what are some of the good ways you found for training command? And in terms of, actually throwing a baseball, not with training aids,
My overall one that I found best for overall control was throwing to sort of a net or like a strike zone target, because it's incredibly it's very black and white. It's either you hit the target, you hit the strike zone, or you didn't. And overall, like, you can take the number that you put in there, or if I wasn't tracking it, just like a general feeling of like, okay, I put the ball in the zone more often than not. And I got slightly more granular with that when I was trying to go more specifically for command, which is I would throw at a baseball or a softball sitting on a tee,
Mm.
So trying to throw very specifically to one spot. And that's actually like, that's a very, very difficult thing to do. To hit your spot perfectly is incredibly difficult, as I'm sure you understand.
Yeah.
So when that would be a very a challenging day of training. For the slightly easier ones, I would actually prop up a catcher's mitt on a tee.
Yeah, I
Uh,
saw some videos where you did that. Yeah.
it's a little more realistic. It gives you a little more of like an actual game
A bigger
target.
target too. Yeah.
It's a little bit bigger, so you have a little bit better chance of actually putting the ball in the area that you want it, and like giving yourself a little bit more of a chance to actually hit it and feel good about it. Those have been my methods the last couple years, I think, mostly.
Yeah, I know like DBU had bought that command tracker target. What they were doing first was they were having pitchers throw to a single spot, which is a 5x7. And that's the highest level. So
Right.
then they soon found they would only get about 20% command rate. And then they changed to doing an area like 4 boxes.
Right.
And now it's like a catcher's mitt size, and it's a little
Yeah,
bit easier.
it's more like quadrants of the zone at that point.
Yeah. So I found like what we do is we have scripted bullpens. It starts with a bigger area, and then as you go, it starts narrowing the area in for you. So it helps you focus in on the corner or focus on another corner.
Yeah, that makes
Uh,
sense. It's also very similar to, so you know how pitching works basically. Early in the
yeah.
count, you're just trying to get it over, you're trying to get ahead of the hitter.
Yeah.
As you're trying to get them out, you have to throw more specific pitches. So that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. And I think Gil was describing, oh no, it was Dan DeQuitt. Uh, they would have a guy throw to the glove side down strike, and they would have to do 5 of those in a row for a warm up or a bullpen. And until the guy did that, he wouldn't let him throw anywhere else because basically you had to sync all of your mechanics and everything right to get that spot. And then we would move up to the up and in, arm side,
Okay.
because those are kind of the difficult spots to hit. So if you focus on those, then the other areas become easier to hit.
Okay, that's interesting. I don't think I've ever heard of that specifically.
Yeah, in some of the earlier episodes with Dan DeQuet, we talk about that and what they had done, and also Gil Patterson from the A's. Because Gil Patterson also was with I think the Expos and with the Yankees for director pitching for a long time too. You
Right.
know, So the other thing was you were talking about these different balls that they use for training. I've heard that some like chaos training, different things, but I've always thought that those are teaching you to deal with the variance. If your delivery was right, you would have less variance in that. You would have more chance for command. So like if you were, I always give the analogy on a boat, trying to shoot a target from a boat, you could deal with the variance and hit it. But it'd be better to get out of the boat and stand on the ground and throw it. So what I mean by that is if your mechanics are sound and you're keeping your head still and on line to the target, I think you'll have much better chance of command.
So I think that that's a good point, but I also think that it's right. Shooting a target is a lot simpler than throwing a baseball to a target.
Yeah.
I'm reading a really interesting book right now, actually called "How We Learn to Move" by, I believe, Rob Gray, and it's a really interesting look at that exact concept. Basically, how people perform these motor tasks that require intense coordination. And right, the idea is that what makes the most sense, I think, is that the simpler and more repeatable an action is, that's what most people should gravitate to if you have to perform a repetitive task.
Yeah.
And what has actually been found over and over again is that that's not really how people move, because every time you go through a motion, it's slightly different. If you try to write your signature 10 times, they're all going to have little variations, but they're all your signature.
Yeah, but it's the amount of variation that if you reduce it, you're going to increase your chance of having command. That's what I think.
Absolutely. But I think that the way that you do that is by exposing yourself to more, if you expose yourself to more variable training stimuli and conditions, you give your body more opportunities to work through those solutions,
That makes sense.
and give yourself more a broader range of solutions to call upon when you need to make those adjustments. So if I miss arm side a ton. That's my big miss. As you would expect, my fastball runs a ton, so it's natural for me to miss arm side a lot. So forcing myself to throw with a baseball that's 5% larger, it wants to come out of my hand sooner, and it forces me to really focus on staying through my target further glove side in order to get it into the strike zone or to my throwing partner's chest. And even if that's not directly applicable to my actual pitching mechanics, even if it's too big of a variation that it actually makes sense, I think that there's huge value in it forcing me to be aware of it and knowing that I have to make this adjustment if I want to get this ball here. So that if I'm in a game and I am missing arm side, I can say, okay, we need to drive the ball through this left-handed hitter's hip. We need to get it all the way in there. And I have that feeling and I have that awareness to be able to make that adjustment on the fly, hopefully.
So then it's kind of like those, what does Lance Wheeler have, kind of bands that everyone likes?
Yeah, Lance Wheeler's the core velocity belt.
Yeah, would it be something like that where it's kind of giving you more of a feel for your hips and things like that?
I think that's a good way to look at it as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds interesting. So, what do you think, if you were to describe a complete pitcher, like the qualities you need to be a successful pitcher, what would you say they are?
That is a good question, and I would say sort of a tough one.
I'm going to give you a list in a little while of the qualities that I think a good pitcher would have. But I just wanted to hear, like, before I showed you the list, maybe you have some different ones that I've thought of,
I would say you need, I guess for a complete pitcher, you probably need somebody who is going to be a successful pitcher. You need to have something unique, be that your stuff, your velo, your command. You need to stand out. You need to stand out in something.
Well, I liked what you said too, because before every game, what I always tell my son is be you. Good luck, be you, command and mix. And what I mean by be you is you're not Chapman, you're not Maddox, you're Boyle. Like
right.
And, I think pitchers have to learn who they are. Like, you have a unique style. Your arm slot, your movement, it makes you unique.
Yes, I think that having something unique and being aware of what makes you unique are probably the two biggest characteristics overall. And knowing how to play that to having enough confidence in that to play that to your strength, and understanding how to play to your strengths, I think, are probably the most important things there.
All right. I'm going to show you a list of the top qualities I think a pitcher needs. And if you could pick the 4 that you think are the most important, every show I've been showing people this list, and I'm kind of keeping track of what they choose. And eventually I'm going to, announce what like the top 4 are. So
I'll be interested to see that list, I think.
The items are character, command, changing speeds, movement, max velocity, sequencing, reading batters, mental toughness, and a new one I added called fielding position.
I do like that you added it, but I don't think that one's going to come into play all that often. I can't imagine that's going to rank in the top 4 of everyone you ask.
Yeah, you never know. I just put them in there. So
yeah. I am going to. Ooh. Do I have to rank them 1 to 4, or am I just picking 4 things I think are important?
Yeah, which is your number 1, 2, 3, 4? Like, what do you think are the most important?
All right, I'm gonna say that movement is most important, and that is certainly something that I am biased into thinking because of the way I pitch. But I think that one of the things that sort of is misconstrued is the role that movement plays overall.
Well, what do you mean by that?
So I think that people, when you watch Garrett Cole pitch on TV,
Right.
maybe Garrett Cole's not a great example because he throws 100, but his fastball looks straight. But Garrett Cole's fastball it's not straight in the bad sense. He's getting 18 to 20 inches of vertical movement, which is elite, and will miss bats because they're going to be under his fastball.
Yeah. Well, that's a really good point. Uh, I had someone contact me. It was late last year sometime, and they were facing DeGrom. It was another MLB team. It was a hitting coach for another team,
Right.
and he was telling me that DeGrom's fastball looks straight. How do we deal with it? I pulled up the data and I looked at it in my pitch grader software, and I could see if I looked at it behind the catcher, DeGrom's fastball, I could see the movement. But when I went to the point of view of a right-handed batter, all of a sudden it looks straight. It's like the
Right.
point of view you're looking from matters a lot.
Yeah. But I think it's just the idea that if it looks like it's that like the idea that left and right movement is the only kind of movement is what I think is it's lost sometimes in the broadcast, in the watching a pitcher throw. It's just like, yeah, DeGrom's fastball looks straight, but it's vertically, it's riding. It looks like it's hopping past you.
Mhm.
Whereas some fastballs that in what we call the dead zone, those fastballs that have equal amounts of vertical and horizontal movement, those are the
Mhm.
ones that are generally easiest for hitters to actually hit, but they look like they're running. They look like they have good movement. I think that that's something that in baseball is pretty like in most of in the two minor league systems that I've been a part of, it's something that's understood incredibly well. But if you have a guy who has a 20-inch vertical fastball, it looks straight, but he's going to still have a lot of success because it's still outlier movement, just not in the way that people not in the way that you might think. It doesn't look like it should beat you, but it will. So I will say that movement, despite being a little understood, is actually probably the most important thing. If you can stand out in some way there.
Yeah.
Uh,
If you're different from the norm,
yes,
whatever, you
exactly.
know, it,
The goal is you just don't want to be normal. You don't want to be average.
that's right.
Second, I will put command because that is incredibly important, and I think that you will not. You obviously won't survive without it. You need to
Yeah.
have the ability to put the ball where you want it. Third, I'm going to say max velocity because that one is also going to help you a lot. It's one of the few things that is quantifiable and also has a direct correlation with success at the highest level.
Yeah, well,
That's
a little bit higher velo will give you more chance for error. It gives you a little bit of an edge. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, and it makes all of your other pitches better
Yeah.
just by giving the hitter less time to react. And last, I'm going to go. Uh, I'm not the world's biggest fan of the phrase mental toughness, but what it conveys, I agree with. The fourth and final, I will say mental toughness, but just like the ability to, in the sense of the ability to stay present on the mound, understand the task at hand, and not get distracted by whatever it might be, the situation, trying to make the hitter look stupid, anything like that. I think that ability to stay present between each pitch and throw each pitch with the same quality and the same focus as you threw the last one is an incredibly valuable skill.
Yeah. Because all the things that can happen on the field between missing a call or a player making an error, or sometimes, I don't know. Have you ever pitched in the minor leagues for against Brooklyn? I went to some
No,
games
I
there.
don't believe I ever did.
My son pitched a game there, and man, they were loud.
Yeah, I
And so
think I'll be honest with you. I don't mind when crowds are loud, like big loud crowds, because you can't hear anything. It's just noise. The
yeah.
worst is when it's a small crowd in one of those places where nobody goes and you can just hear each individual person yelling at you.
Oh, I
That's a lot
remember
harder to block out.
I remember him pitching in Pulaski when it was part of the league.
Oof.
Oh, and he was talking about it, how hard it was because it didn't seem like there was anything on the line.
Yeah.
Like when there's a lot of chants and screaming and yelling, he feels like, all right, it pumps him up like something's on the line. When no one's there, it's like no one cares.
Yeah, it's sort of, you're like on a backfields game for spring training, but it's,
Yeah,
you
you
know, in
kind of have,
season. Yeah.
yeah. Then mentally, you have to kind of gear yourself up. You know.
Yeah. That's a challenge in and of itself. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially throughout
So
a lot of places in the minors.
yeah. So mental toughness. I mean, it's that kind of thing, but it's also mental focus. Uh,
Yeah,
Things
I
that would be involved with your mind dealing with things.
absolutely. I 100% agree. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming on the show. That's been
Absolutely.
a unique kind of perspective. We haven't really gone into some of the things that you mentioned. Uh, I'm going to look forward to seeing what you do with the Ducks and get back into the affiliated ball soon and
I sure
see
hope
what you
so.
do. All right.
Yeah. Thank you very much for having me on. This is a great time.
All right. Take care.